My name is John Hagan. I'm the graduate assistant here in the Center for Teaching and Mentoring. I've worked with very experienced directors, so they've taught me a thing or two about teaching, which I'll share with you today, the previous session as well. So today we are talking about modeling and practice as principles of effective teaching. We are continuing to ask ourselves the fundamental question, what do effective teachers do? In our previous session, we listed some of these things from research that effective teachers do. So we talked about teacher clarity in our previous session, explaining a challenge. Today, we will touch a bit on teacher clarity and a little bit on formative assessment. So our goals for today's session, let me let this person in. Our goals for today's session, we would learn how to model and demonstrate using those as effective tools in the classroom. And we will deepen our knowledge on formative assessment, what that is and how to effectively do that. So let's jump right into that. Modeling, what's that? It's the process of demonstrating a skill or concept step by step for students to emulate. Focus on the keyword step by step. In our previous session, we talked about showing exemplars of excellence to our students. Once we start, let them see what the excellent product looks like. We should keep referring to the end goal, that by the end of this course, you'll be able to do this particular thing at this level of expertise. But that can be quite daunting to a new student, somebody who is now starting to get familiar with some of the things you are already very knowledgeable in, right? So we need to step by step model these concepts, these skills, right? So that students can follow us. And this is based on the concept that we learn by observation, right? So as your students see you model how to compose music, for example, how to do psychoanalysis of a mental patient, for example, they learn, to do that by observation. There are two approaches to this practice. Modeling from the ground up, where we start with the basic building blocks of the information, how they all come together to form one final product. For example, you teach how to use idiomatic expressions in an essay, right? You start by what are idiomatic expressions, the various idiomatic expressions and what they mean before they finally use those idiomatic expressions successfully in an essay, for example, right? The other end of that is deconstruction, where we are moving top down, right? We show our students the complete final product, and then we kind of break it down into its various chunks. So this is a perfect essay or an excellent essay where someone has effectively used idiomatic expressions, right? So then we need our students to identify, okay, what are these idiomatic expressions? How was it used effectively, so on and so forth. So we are starting from the top down and breaking it down that way. So these are the two approaches. Ideally, you should be doing both, right? From the ground up and top down. You start from the very basics, midpoint, you can show them the final work and see how can we deconstruct this work and identify the various principles and various building blocks, that have made this final product. The sequence of modeling starts with teacher explanation and modeling, of course. And this is what we talked about chiefly in our previous session. So to our folks in the Zoom room, if you missed the first session, it is on our YouTube channel. You can watch that and catch yourself up. I'll share the link in the chat later on. So teacher explanation and modeling, that leads to joint practice and construction. So after you have taught the lesson, you practice with them in the classroom. You are guiding them as they practice it. And then eventually they can go on to have independent practice and application of this knowledge that they have learned. So, for example, you are teaching a math class, you teach them the principles of addition, subtraction, whatever that may look like, right? And you practice that with them in the classroom, then you give them an assignment, they are off on their own. If it is a history class, for example, you talk about the various dates and names, so on and so forth. You practice with them how to write an essay in history right in the classroom. Then you give them an assignment, then they go off on their own to practice, what you have jointly practiced in class. When we are modeling, we need to be intentional, right? We need to talk about the purpose of what we are doing. Do not take for granted that, oh, well, I am modeling, a concept or a skill and the students will just follow. You need to actually verbalize, right, that I am modeling ABC so that you can see how it's done, and then you can, go on ahead and do it by yourself. So you need to be intentional about it. You need to actually talk about it. Speaking of talking, you need to talk through your decisions as you are modeling an exercise. So you need to kind of let them know what you are thinking in your mind. So an example, you are solving an equation and you say to yourself, you say to yourself out loud so that the class will hear. I'm going to group all the variables with a coefficient of x on one side of the equation and all the variables with a coefficient of y on another side of the equation. I'm doing this because I cannot compare apples with oranges, right? I need to compare apples with apples and oranges with oranges, so on and so forth. So they know what you are thinking, right? And by so doing, you are teaching your students the skill of metacognition, right? The art of thinking about their own thinking, right? Thinking about their own learning, that they are aware of their own thought processes as they are working through whatever it is that you are teaching them. So they know, oh, okay, this is why I need to do this. I need to do this because of this. At some point, as you are teaching, you need to let the students call the shots, right? Now, note that when we talked about the sequence, we mentioned that there is teacher explanation, there is joint practice, and so on and so forth. So at this point, you have already taught the class, or you have given some foundational knowledge of what they need to know. So at this point, they do know something, right? So you ask them to call the shots. For example, in a chemistry class, right, you are combining two chemicals. Before you do that, you ask your students, what do you think would be the product of this mixture, right? What will happen? So they call the shots and they feel part of the class, right? It's some type of collaborative teaching. Now, as people who are beginning our career or we are still trying to perfect our skills in teaching, there is no shame in having to prepare in advance, right? Because you don't want to be stuck as you are modeling a concept or an exercise. Remember, in our previous session, we said that emotions are contagious in the classroom, right? If you, as the supposed expert on the topic, right, you are found fumbling or you are stuck, then you kind of infuse that same confusion in your students, right? So there's no shame in preparing the model in advance, knowing every step ahead of time so that you can, flow and be confident as you are modeling the practice. Another skill is to use student models. After you have taught a class, you invite one of your students to demonstrate, what you have just taught. In a music class, for example, you ask somebody to come and, demonstrate a composition of something, right? Some art piece or whatever that might look like. The advantage is that as students see that their peers are able to successfully demonstrate whatever it is that they've been taught, they are more encouraged, right, to also learn. They are like, oh, well, Jane has been able to do it. Well, I can also do that, right? So that is the trick there. Also, by doing this, you are leveraging the skill and intellect of your very good students, right? They also feel collaborators in the classroom because some students do not need multiple attempts to understand the concept. Once you say the first time, they've already gotten it. And as you are further explaining, they get bored because they already understand that which you are trying to explain. So you kind of rub them in by using them as student models, and that gets the class, going in a collaborative fashion. So people are still joining. Alrighty, so the next concept is to keep rough drafts. Keep rough drafts. We talked about showing them exemplars of excellence, right? Let them know what the perfect or what the excellent assignment or essay or whatever it is looks like. But also you need to show them rough drafts so that they can appreciate the journey, right? They can appreciate the journey of getting to a successful final product, because success, doesn't come just like that. You have to actually go through the steps. So that is why you need to keep rough drafts. You could even show them assignments that you did while you were taking that class a couple semesters back or whatnot. And that will help them appreciate their own struggles, right, as students. I recently submitted a manuscript and it was accepted. Yay, that's something to celebrate. And as I was working on the corrections, I got tired, I got bored. I decided to go back to the first draft. Can you believe that the version of the manuscript I submitted was the 9th version, right? I had, changed so many things. That was the 9th version. I went back to the first draft and oh my God, I was like, this is a great journey. Because if I compare the first draft with the final draft, like it was, a wide chasm, right? So you need to show them rough drafts, right? So that they can appreciate that journey. The next thing is to share multiple models. What that helps with is that you are not going to siphon creativity by showing them just one model. We do not want to create a straight jacket system, right? We want students to have that flexibility to express themselves, right? So we show multiple examples, multiple models, so that the students can pick and choose or even build their own example based off of the very good and excellent examples that we show them. When I was in 4th or 5th grade, class 5 or class, I can't remember, but we were being taught how to write, an essay, and we were taught to use linking words or lead-in words, rather, like, moreover, more so, furthermore, so on and so forth. And as the teacher was teaching, the example she used was firstly, secondly, right? You need to use those words to show that you're about to talk about a new concept or a new paragraph or whatever that might look like. So in an assignment, we all went, firstly, secondly, thirdly, fourthly. Imagine if you had 10 points, you're going to say tenthly. And it was because that was the only example she showed us, right? So she came back, she was like, no, 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 guys, that's not what I mean. And she showed us other words we could use, like moreover, therefore, so on and so forth, right? So if you do not show multiple examples, it will come back at you, right? When you are grading, you are going to be reading the same thing. And if you have a class of what, 20, 30 people, you are reading the same thing 20, 30 times. So you need to have multiple models, right? Multiple models. By so doing, you are avoiding the mental clone trap. Now, the mental clone trap is, this is how I did it. And I was successful at doing it. If you want to be successful, do it this way and no other way, right? And that is not what we want to achieve. We want to avoid the mental clone trap. So we want to show them, well, this is the way I did it. This is another excellent way you could do it. This is another way. So like 3, 4, 5 examples, right? So that the students have, that flexibility to be creative. Yeah. You only need a short video. Jenna, just a short video is fine. Yeah. And a few pictures maybe. Yeah. Right. So guys, this is the paradigm we are talking about. This is the paradigm. The model which will lead them to the final product. But in between them, they need time for practice. So you show them what an excellent work looks like, which is going to lead them to produce a final product by themselves. But in between those two times, you need time for practice, right? Which we are going to talk about in a few minutes. So this is a one pager of what we've just talked about. I like one pages. It's a summary of everything we've talked about today and modeling. Okay, if you do not have a question, I have a question. Okay. Let's talk about this. Have you ever tried modeling in your class, or have you ever witnessed a professor model a class? How did it go? What were some of the things you saw that maybe we have just talked about, or some of the things you wish you would have seen that you didn't see? Let's give it a go.
This isn't exactly the modeling that is covered in this, but it's a slight variation. So I have my students model. There's 5 tables, and so I create 5 groups, and I divide up the lesson into 5s, and I'll let each table elect a spokesperson and let them teach that section. I only do it about once a semester, but they really get it. They learn well from each other, and the part that they're assigned, they've got it down.
Yeah, great. And that is mostly after you have already taught the class, right? They have that foundational knowledge, right? So they are not spreading misconceptions because you have already taught them what they need to, what the foundational knowledge, right, that they need. So yeah, that's a good way to go. Any other submission? You've tried modeling your class, how did it go? You've seen a professor do it. Did they do it well? Was there something you wanted to see?
When it comes to teaching a foreign language, because this is when I have the student repeat the words and they like, for instance, if I say the word and I have them practice it, repeat it over and over, and try to have them use it either in a sentence or try to have them communicate with other students in the class. Some of them, the accent is not actually the same, but when I model it and then they model it back and then we work back and forth in the classroom, so it helps them to not only retain the word, but to also memorize it and apply it, and so it.
So I'm glad that you said something about retention. We'll talk about that in our next session. Yeah, so that's a good lead in. Hannah, you have something to add?
I mean, with what we do, we get a lot of these modeling things, and a lot of the time they go well.
Um, I mean, when you only have, with recording, you
Right.
only 90% of the time only have one console. So it's kind of like, now we got to let 12
Well,
people do it. And
Yeah,
it's kind of hard to everybody gather around and see this one tiny thing. So, but it's more or less of just the industry, less than a teacher thing.
okay.
But I do see a lot of teachers, at least in this industry, not just MTSU, but just across the board,
Right.
fall into that mentor clone trap.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm like, okay, so it's,
Yeah,
but I mean, that's kind of the other thing too, is we also know it works, so we keep doing it. So it's kind of, it's this double-edged sword.
exactly,
It's
exactly.
a double-edged sword there.
Mhm.
So it's about maybe finding a way to do both.
Yeah.
Of like, let's keep doing what works, but also experiment.
Experiment, exactly. The mental clone trap is very tricky because I mean this is how I did it and it worked for me, right? This is the only way I know, so it's very easy to fall in that trap. But let's try to have the best of both worlds, right?
Mhm.
We show them how we did it, and we can also show them how other people did it or other ways, where they can also do that. Now, let's talk about some of the potential challenges to modeling. You've already mentioned one that maybe we have only one device, right? We can't have so many people come
Yeah.
to it because we are constrained with time, right? Are there any other potential challenges to modeling we can think about?
On day one of class,
Mhm.
each semester for each class I teach, I say to be successful in college, I reviewed the material before I walked in. I paid attention to the professor while I was in there. I reviewed it again within 48 hours. And then before the midterm or final, I looked at it a fourth time. And that made me Dean's List very successful. But I also follow up with do what works for you.
Mhm.
And then I asked, tell me how you remember that. Tell me
Yeah.
how you do that process. And then throughout the semester, for every mnemonic or word picture or story I give them, then I follow up with, you do what works for you. You are not me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that could definitely be a challenge if the
Yeah.
professor, instructor thought their way
This
was
is
the only
the
way.
Yeah.
That would not be good.
Yeah, that's a good catch. Oh, that one. First remember. Yeah. Are there any other? All right, so we move on. So we move on to the next, which is practice. Now, practice, what's that? What's practice? It is a repetition of knowledge and skills, which is aimed at improved performance and mastery, right? So the key word for practice is repetition, repetition. We keep doing it several times. We keep having multiple attempts at it so that we can improve performance and attain mastery. Now, there are two types of practice. We have practice for fluency and deliberate practice. These we will talk about in a few seconds. Practice for fluency. What's that? This is moving information into our long-term memory. That is all that is. So that we can recall those pieces of information automatically, right? These are foundational pieces of information we need for attaining mastery in whatever it is that we are doing. So, for example, in a music class, you need to know your scales, right? You need to know your C major scales. You need to know D major. You should know that D major has one sharp, which is F sharp. D major has two sharps, F sharp and C sharp, right? Yes, and G major has only one sharp, if I'm correct, F sharp. You need to have these on your fingertips. You shouldn't have to struggle to recall this piece of information, right? If in a chemistry class, of course, you need to know all the elements on the periodic table and their symbols because you are going to be using that back and forth in all of that you are doing in chemistry, right? In a history class, You need to recall names and dates. They should be on your fingertips. How do they get on your fingertips? How do you recall these things automatically? By practice, constant practice. So that is what practice for fluency is. We want to have these pieces of information on our fingertips. Another example, maybe in arts, right? You need to know your primary colors. You need to know what colors you mix to get a secondary color and get a tertiary, all those things, right? You need to have those at your fingertips. Now, the next type of practice is deliberate practice, and that is focused on our working memory, right? We are using our working memory or our short-term memory for that. And that is aimed at the mastery of a specific skill. So we are recalling the things in our long-term memory, things that we recall automatically because we have practiced them, so on and so forth. And we are using those pieces of information to master a particular skill. So back to the music example, if you know your scales in D major, you know that it has two sharps, F sharp, C sharp, that is on your fingertips. You can then deliberately practice how to play canon in D major, for example, right? You practice that because you already know the foundational skills. You know the elements on the periodic table and their symbols. So when you are working out a chemical equation, you don't have to think, what does K stand for? Is it calcium or potassium? You know, those things, you shouldn't have to struggle to recall that because you have practiced severally and that is in your long-term memory. So these are the two types of practice. Practice for fluency, which is driving information into your long-term memory so that you can recall them very easily. And then deliberate practice, which is focused on a specific skill, right? A specific skill at a specific time. This is the continuum of practice. From the beginning, because our students are neophytes, okay, they do not know much of what we are talking about, they will need heavy guidance, right? They are heavily dependent on us to help them practice. So remember, we talked about explanation, joint practice, and application. So this is the continuum, right? From dependence to heavy guidance to light guidance, then they are independent because they have practiced it several times. Then they can go off themselves to apply whatever it is that we have taught them. Guys, the key word to practice is repetition. Repetition. We need to constantly give it several tries, several goes, so that students can transfer the information from their short-term memory to their long-term memory. We cannot blame students if they forgot what we taught, if we are not giving them enough time for practice, right? The human mind is prone to forget, as cognitive psychologist Daniel Willingham would say, right? Our minds are prone to forget. So we need to give students multiple shots by giving them assignments, quizzing without practice. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But we need to give them multiple shots so that they can remember what we are teaching them. And guys, practice makes permanent. That is what we are talking about. We need to give them multiple shots so that whatever it is that they are practicing becomes permanent, becomes something on their fingertips. Isn't it sad that after you teach something, couple of weeks later, you ask students what it is that was, and they can't recall it. Like it's heartbreaking, right? It's as if they never took their class. Like, guys, I taught you, you know, it's very heartbreaking and demoralizing. So let us try to have multiple iterations. Let them practice it several times. Understanding and retention are not exactly the same thing. Okay.
All right, man. Where are you going?
How's it going, sir?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming.
Everybody's done.
Yeah, sorry.
Everybody?
Yeah, everyone's gone. Yeah, this is next class. All righty, thank you. Any questions for the level of
No question.
So you may have done so well to teach a class, like you have employed all of your skills, all of your teaching skills, you have taught them, and you have stopped to check for understanding. And you realize that the students, they understand, they did follow whatever it is that you are teaching, okay? And you are proud of yourself because, as a teacher, you are happy that you have taught your students and they understand, right? But understanding is not the same as retention. The fact that they understood it today does not necessarily mean that 2 weeks from now, you quiz them on it and they would be able to get it. Now, understanding is necessary for retention because, of course, you need to understand it before you can obtain it, but it's not sufficient. And what makes us move from understanding to retention is what? Help me out, is what? We just talked about it.
Repetition.
Repetition, practice. Yes, repetition, practice, right? We move from, so we see what I just did there. I made you call the shots. You see, you see that? Yes, so we move from understanding to retention. Now, let's talk about how to effectively practice, how to make this stick in the minds of our students. We have massed practice as against interleaved practice. Now, massed practice is you teach a subject or a topic, you quiz your students on it, and you shelf it. You move on to the next, topic 2. You talk about it, you quiz them, you shelf it. Interleaving, however, is when you quiz your students on closely related topics that you have taught in the past. So this is some type of representation of massed practice as against interleaved. So you see here, there's just one type of practice. They shelf it, they move on to the next. But interleaving, you mix it up, okay? This is another example, AAAB. When I was teaching back in Ghana, I did this, but I did not know the science of it. I just did it because it was convenient, right? For about 2.5 weeks, I'll just go on teaching, stop and check for understanding. I would quiz them in the room, what is this? They raise their hands, they tell me what it is. And I'm sure they understand it, right? Then I move on to the next topic. So the second half of the 3rd week, I quiz them on all the topics I had been teaching for the past 2 weeks or so, 2 or 3 topics. Now, they didn't like it, but it worked, right? And like I said, at that point, I didn't know the science of interleaving. I just did it because it was convenient, right? I could quiz them on multiple things at the same time and make sure that they are able to connect the dots, so on and so forth. Now, why do we need to do this? Why do we have to interleave our teaching as against massed practice? It is based on the cognitive science of the spacing effect and interleaving. The spacing effect is that students learn effectively after they leave some time in between the material that they've studied. They leave it for a bit, go on to other things and come back to it, recall it and test themselves on it. They are able to learn faster when they do that. And guys, there are tons and tons of research that supports spacing effect and interleaving. At this point, it is undisputed. There are several studies that tell us that the best way to learn is to leverage interleaving and spacing effects. It is undisputed at this point. Several studies. You can just go and Google and find out so many studies. Another way or another reason why it's important to have a mixed up or interleave practice is that it helps to differentiate between concepts, right? You are not really sure if you know what an orange is, if you can identify an orange in the midst of apples. Like, does that make sense? Right? If you have been taught what an orange is, and it's so easy, it's orange, right? But if you see orange with apples and pears and all that, you're like, oh, okay, then you are really sure you know what an orange is. So that is one of the benefits of having an interleave practice. We are able to let our students differentiate between closely related topics. And it also helps us to leverage what they call in education desirable difficulty. Remember, we talked about this in our previous session when we were talking about challenge. We need to move our students from comfort zone. We shouldn't drive them too far to the panic zone. We need to be in the middle, struggle zone, which is the difficulty, where they are engaging in healthy struggle. Healthy struggle is making them think deeply so that they can, recall the things that we are teaching. And if your class is designed effectively, and I hope it is, you realize that all your lessons are flowing and they are interconnected, right? Lesson 1 flows into lesson 2. It's seamless. Lesson 2 introduces you to lesson 3. And as you may have seen in this workshop series, our first session, Kona, you can attest to that, our first session flows into this session. And when you join us for our next session, you see that also flows into that. So it's all seamless, right? Now, if you do this and you test your students at the end of all of these topics, they're able to appreciate that, oh, okay, this thing that I learned is connected to that thing I'm learning now, right? Last week, I submitted a paper in one of the classes I'm taking, and I found myself making reference to something we learned 2 weeks ago, right? I was so proud of myself. I was like, oh, look at me making connections, okay? And at some point, I have even quoted things I learned in other courses in a class I'm taking now, right? And I believe that our learning should not be siloed, right? It should not be this course is this course and that course. There should be some kind of interweaving of concepts, because that is what we are eventually aiming at. We need to be masters of everything that we are studying, to have that web of knowledge. So that is why these are some of the reasons why, if we have an interleaved practice, it would help us a lot. Now let's talk about some of the practical steps. Quiz without penalty. You would think that if I'm supposed to give my students multiple attempts, if I'm supposed to give them several assignments, how am I going to grade all of those? I have 20 students in my class. If I'm giving them 3 assignments every week, that's a lot of work for me, right? So one of the tricks is to quiz without penalty, where you quiz them right there in class. So you have maybe handouts, a few questions, and quiz without penalty. It is not graded, right? It is not assessed. It's for them to assess their own learning, right? So you give them assignments to do there in class, you show them the answers, they compare, am I right, am I wrong? If I'm wrong, why? Then you maybe reteach the class, or you just touch on a few points that most people missed, and then you just move on with that, because we have a lot to teach, but we have little time. One other thing that we also need to be cognizant of is the distinction between learning and performance, right? High grades does not necessarily mean that the students have learned, right? So we need to give them multiple shots so that we are sure that they are learning and they are not just scoring high grades, because So sometimes you give an assignment, students score, very high grades, and maybe you meet them again in another class and you are making a reference to something that you have taught in the previous class, and you ask them, it's like they never took the class. Like, guys, I taught you this, So there is a distinction between learning and performance, and we need to drive that. We shouldn't be too much focused on grades and the numbers. Now, we will talk about that into much detail in our next session when we are talking about feedback, how to grade, so that students are not focusing on the number. They are not focusing on whether they had A, B, or C, but then they are focusing on the fact that they've actually learned, because that is the point of higher education, right? That they get to learn something. Okay. Now, depth is more crucial than breadth, okay? We need to, if you like, go deep with the very core things that we want our students to walk away with at the end of the course, at the end of the class. And we need to drive that particular outcome repeatedly. Talk about it separate from the beginning of the class, the middle of the class, at the end of the class. The thing that you want students to walk away with, talk about it repeatedly and test them on it several, so that you are sure that at least if they do not remember anything at all, this one thing or these sets of things, they would definitely walk away with, so that you don't meet them somewhere and you ask them and it's like they never took their class. That is so heartbreaking. So guys, this, like I told you, I like long pages. This is everything that we have talked about today. Here we go. Summarizes what we've talked about in practice. And to our folks in the Zoom room, I would send you copies of this, and of course, for you as well in the room. So this summarizes what we've talked about in practice. We need to give them multiple shots at attempting the things that we've talked about. We need to quiz without penalty. We need to infuse our quizzing in our teaching so that we don't have to be grading, because that is a lot of work. All right, let's talk about some discussion. How can we have multiple attempts to practice with very limited time? This is something I think about a lot. If we want our students to practice, and we just have 90 minutes or 60 minutes with them?
Almost 3 hours for A&P
Oh,
labs.
okay,
Because
so-
I'm teaching them the human body.
Right, so I mean, how do we do that?
Well, we have open labs too.
Okay,
And when they come to open lab, I literally go over every body part with them.
okay,
I'm very
Okay.
hands-on with
Right.
my teaching. My
Good.
students have really high.
good. That's good to know.
Yeah, I mean, we have tutoring sessions in all of our studio, or at least the main ones that we teach students in.
Okay,
But you got grad students going to them, you've got undergrads going to them. So it's kind of, now some days nobody's there, but when it gets time, like closer to proficiencies, everybody's there, and it's kind of that fight for it. So maybe it might be like a scheduling thing,
Right.
or hey, this set of times is for these group of students, this set of times is these, or something like that, it might be
Right.
better.
right. And how do we emphasize learning of like this? This is dear to my heart. Like this, how do we emphasize to our students and even to ourselves that it's not about a grade, right? It's about the fact that at the end of the day, you are walking away with something, right? How do we do that?
Give opportunities to improve the grade.
Right.
So like, that's kind of something I've dealt with too, where it's like coming into new topics, it's really hard, but scholarships define
Yeah.
my thing. So I'm more about getting it right than learning it sometimes.
Uh-huh.
Because it's like, yeah, let me get the paper right and I'll forget it and I'm learning the content.
Yeah.
That's not just me, that's a lot of people.
Mhm.
So it might be allowing for improvement,
Right.
allowing you to multiple attempts, or like, hey, if you don't like your grade, here's the feedback.
Mhm.
If you get it into me, if you give me another revision of it in 2 weeks, I'll improve the grade.
Yeah.
Which is more work on the teacher, but
Right, yeah,
it's kind of that push to shove, how much are you willing to give?
yeah, true. Thank you for that submission. Is there any other submission how we can, emphasize learning over grades? It's about learning, at the end of the day, what happens? Rather than I scored an A. If you can tell me, 2 semesters later, what you learned in that course, that is, well, it's not pointless. I was always say that is pointless, right? So of course, it counts your GPA and everything, but that is not
For real world application, how is it?
Exactly, for real world. Alrighty, so we are almost on top of it. Yes, please do that. Yeah. Any questions from our Zoom room? In the absence of that, thank you guys for spending your mid-morning with us, and to our participants in the Zoom room also, thank you for joining. We had about 13 folks join us from Zoom, so that's quite a crowd. Our next session would be on April 2nd. We are going to be talking about feedback and questioning. And this is one way where we can practice with our students in class by questioning them as we are teaching. So we are going to learn a few techniques about how to question students in such a way that we are making sure that they are learning, that they are engaged in class, and so on and so forth. We are going to learn about how to give feedback in such a way that we are not emphasizing grades, but we are also emphasizing the fact that students ought to have learned something at the end of the class. So I hope you join us next month as well. And thank you for coming.